Good evening and welcome again. So in this lecture we will be running through the different types of lights we can get in the game, how they interact with different objects and the ways that we can use them. And then we're just going to settle on the type of lighting that we'll be using for this type of game setup. It's probably the one which will work best because, again, just to reiterate, this is a very dynamic game setup that we have, so there's no point in having loads of little point lights where you'd normally need to bake the detail in. So we can use one very adaptable and useful lighting system. But I will run through all of the others before we get to that stage. I'll also mention as well that I said in the previous lecture that you cannot find the skybox by searching through this panel here. And after saying that, I realised there is a way you can do that, and someone may have stumbled on this and be about to call me out on it, and that's fine. But the only way you can find it in here is on the recently placed tab, and it will now show as the BP Skysphere. But obviously that won't appear there until you first uncovered the engine content package and brought it into the game. So I'm kind of half right. I've never seen this before, but you can find it from the modes panel, but only if you've used it recently in the past. Otherwise you still won't be able to find it, and you will need to go through that procedure I've mentioned. So hopefully that makes sense. I just wanted to cover that in case anyone was having a look through here to see what you can find and what kind of things are available. And obviously if you did notice that and just watched the previous lecture, you may wonder why I didn't mention that. So now I have. Anyway, for the lighting, what we can do, if we go down to the lights panel, we have 4 different types of lights. So the first one I'm going to go through, I'll go through them in order, starting from the ones we won't be using. So we have our spotlight, and this simply casts a cone of light from the point up here, and it will be diluted as it spreads out and covers the whole range. So this would be one which would be perfect for things like torches, or even flames will be able to use this if you add a kind of flickering effect to it, as it has the kind of fall off you'd expect in that type of thing. Now the closer to the object it gets, the more crisp the ring of the cone light will be, to the point where it then starts adding some outer ring of lighting there. And again, just to recap for anyone brand new to this, all I'm doing is clicking on these and dragging them in, and that will let you bring them in. And the good thing about these as well is that you can change over here. We can change a lot of different variables. So we've got the intensity so that the light will reach a bit further. We can change things like the colour, so we can give that a nice pink glow if you like pink. We can change the outer angle and the inner angle, so it will be a lot more focused, so we're getting more of a laser kind of look to this now rather than a light, a torchlight even. And there are just a lot of different variables there. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's something you can play about with, and you can make some really cool effects by playing about with the lights here. But for now I'm just going to remove those two. And then next we have a point light. So it's fairly similar. It casts a certain amount of light based on its location in the world. So that was the other thing I should have mentioned about the spotlight, is it is very much dependent on where you place it in the world as well. So it's only going to cover an area within this cone that you're seeing here. The point light's very similar, but this time you have a sphere, so it will provide light anywhere within this spherical radius. And position's important as well, because it will take into account whether or not the light is above or below certain faces and things. You've got the same sort of options. We can change the intensity so we can get a much brighter light. We can change the colour again. So all of that is readily available in the point light. And again, there's going to be too many options for me to run through every single one of them, but you'll very quickly work out what each of these different values in the inspector represents and will allow you to do. So again, I'm just going to get rid of the point light. And now the important things that we'll be using. We have our main light that we'll be using for this game, which is a directional light. And then we also have something called a skylight, which will be optional, but I will be keeping it in my project. So the directional light is the thing we definitely need. This will provide the source of light for the game. And now, unlike the other two that we've just looked at, this does not take into account its location. So it can be below the object, and it will cast just as much light on the top as it did previously. If I could just drag it down again. And if you do see this thing down here, it looks as though it's changing the lighting. It's not. This is just making a word preview go across my model. And this is purely because you'll see the word preview if you haven't baked the lights. So we can bake the lights, they'll look a bit better, and that preview will go away. But in regards to the shadows and where the lighting is, it doesn't make any difference on where you place this. So like with the sky sphere, what I tend to do is I'll put this in the 0 axis on each axis there. So make that central to the world. Now what the lighting in this is affected by. Now what this will be affected by is the rotation. This is meant to represent the sun, and the rotation is kind of taking into account or trying to mimic the location of the sun in the sky. So if we look at this arrow down here, this is currently the way that the rays of the sunlight will be hitting, which is why we can see that this side of the ship is lit up more than this side of the ship, because the sun rays, the rays from the sun, are hitting this side and putting this side in shadow. So then if we go into rotation mode, which is E for the quick button, W will take you to transform so you can move things around, and R will put you in scale mode so you can scale things. I'll just quickly show you scaling here. So this is how you would scale an object with the R key. And as with most other programs, Control Z will undo your most recent input. So back to the light, I'll press E again to get the rotation back, and then if we rotate this the other way, we can see now the arrow's pointing the other side and the lighting has gone the opposite way around. And then if we make it go directly down, we're going to get a lot more light on the top and none on the bottom. And if we make it go directly up, then we have pretty much a nighttime thing going on, although not completely realistic for the nighttime thing here because we can still see the bottom. But as far as most games would go, when you've got everything is kind of planted on a floor or has a kind of place in the world anyway, you're not really going to see the bottom, so this would kind of represent putting everything in shadows. So what I will be doing is I'll leave that somewhere like that, so we get a bit of shading in the game, not too much, and that will look quite nice. Now the next thing we can do is if we go back to the sky sphere very quickly, there is an option down here for using directional light actor. So at the moment this is kind of faking the sun, isn't it? We've got this sun over here which is being faked, and the colours are determined by the sun's position. Now we can upgrade this a bit more by going to the drop down here, and we can see we now have one option, which is our directional light that we've just put in the world here. So now this will actually take into account the way that we set the sun up in our world. So if we go back and begin to rotate this, we can see that we not only get the light on the object, but we get a bit of a changing colour. This is kind of reflecting the sky sphere's colour as well as the lighting. And as with any other light, talking about that, over here we can change the colour of the sky sphere's light as well. So we can make that cast a different kind of tint to everything in the world, rather than just the objects that's near, like the other lights did. Okay, and then to get the skybox back to how I wanted it, so the kind of sunset skybox, what we need to do is go back to the directional light, rotate this upwards quite a lot really, and I'll just put it that way so we get a bit of light back on the ship that way. And then if we go back to the sky sphere again, we then need to just touch this and it will automatically assign the value based on the directional light in the scene that we've plugged in just here. And notice now that we don't actually have any effect on this. We can try and manually change the figure and that will just default back to what it thinks the value should be based on the light's rotation and position in the world. So that's how you get that back if you wanted to change the skybox and have it based on the direction of the directional light. So you now need to use both of those in conjunction with each other. So I think that looks okay for the time being. I'll leave that as is. And then finally, I said we'd talk about the skylight. So skylight works directly in line with the skybox and the directional light. So if we drag this in now, in fact, just take a look at how this looks without it. And you may have seen a quick preview there when I started dragging it in. So at the moment, not very much of the rest of the world is reflected on this. We saw a bit of a change when we linked the directional light into the sky sphere as the actual source of the sun, essentially. But with the skylight, this lets us see even more of the skybox being reflected into the model. So now we'll see everything lights up a bit more. And rather than just having solid black shadows, the shadows look now a little bit more defined. The white is reflecting some of the orange from the skybox a bit more. So it just looks as though a lot more of the virtual world is being taken into account on the models. So this is why I'm going to leave this in here, is it just adds that extra level of visual clarity to the game, and it just looks a bit nicer, at least for the kind of setup I'm going for. If you wanted a kind of more clean and forced effect to the lighting and the colour scheme that you've got going, so that all of the colours that you're aiming for are a lot more vibrant and come through more, then you may want to remove the skylight. And the skylight is one thing that, again, there's not actually that many options in the inspector this time for this, and I tend to leave this as standard. It normally works very well as it comes in, so I'm going to leave that as it is. I will, as per usual, put this back at the 0 axis because this, like the sky sphere and the directional light, has no actual relation to its location and the effect it puts on the world. So it will be fine right in the centre, nice and tidy. And then finally, just to recap very quickly, one thing I mentioned but didn't really describe is we were getting the word preview on the wings when I was moving the light, and I said that's because we haven't built the lighting. So what that means is up here there's a word build. We can choose what we build here, so we can build the lights only. We can change the quality, which for now will be fine leaving as preview, but when you get near the end of the game you want to start looking at it in the higher of the production so you can see what the lighting will look like when you make the final release. And we can also build things like the geometry, the paths for AI, and many other things. Now at the moment there's not a lot in the world, so we can just press the build button, and it won't take very long. And this will build the lighting for the game. We can see that taking effect now. And then when we come back again, the lights should now just look a little bit sharper. The shadows have been calculated and built into the model and just look a lot cleaner. So that's what the build does, and that's why it will ask you to build the lighting every now and again when you start making changes to the lights in the world. So I think that's pretty much all we need to go through for the lighting. You can see now which options we're going to be using. So as I said, in regards to the actual light, we're going to be using one actual light, which is our directional light. And then we're going to be using, I don't really know, I don't tend to count this as a light. It's more of a post-process effect that we've got in with the skylight as well. So that's everything set up for the lighting. I think that looks pretty cool already, and obviously we're going to start building on this and adding the proper content of our game into the world. So I'll leave that there for now, and I will see you in the next lecture.